Welcome, my dear listener. It's time now to let your day fall quietly behind you like leaves slipping from a slow breeze or soft feathers drifting towards still water. You are safe here. The world has hushed. You are wrapped in the hush of twilight, and nothing is asked of you now but to rest, to listen, to breathe slowly with the rhythm of this gentle tale. Tonight, I'll tell you a story about a quiet man and the birds that carried love where words alone could never go. A tale of wind-dusted wings, of paper folded into flight, of messages meant only for the heart, and of the quiet companionship that sometimes arrives when we least expect it. So settle in. Let your pillow cradle your thoughts. Let the sound of my voice drift like dusk across a quiet field. This is the story of love written in the dust of wings. And it begins, as so many quiet things do, with a longing, a soft take, a wish carried gently into morning air. There was a cottage on the edge of a silver clearing, one of those quiet places the map never bothers to name. Its roof was steep and mossy, its windows deep set and always open, even in the cooler seasons. And in this little cottage lived a man named Theo. He was not old nor young, just quiet, and often wrapped in linen sleeves rolled gently to the elbow, with soft ink stains across his thumb. Every morning, before the sun had fully opened its golden eye, Theo would step outside in slippers worn smooth at the heel and release a bird, not a living bird, not exactly, a paper one. You see, Theo was a paper folder, a dreamer, someone who lived not in solitude, but in stillness. And each dawn, while the trees still whispered with mist, he would fold a single sheet of cream-colored parchment into the shape of a bird, sometimes a dove, sometimes a swift, sometimes something imagined, and inside he would tuck a message, a note, a thought perhaps he couldn't quite say aloud. And always the same thing happened. The wind would lift the little bird from his palm, and it would flutter up, catch the breeze like a breath, and disappear across the fields. He never knew where they went, or if they went anywhere at all, but he sent one every day because it felt right. Sometimes the notes were just lines of poetry, quiet lines like, "You are the hush I dream of when the world grows too loud." Sometimes they were confessions of yearning he never said aloud. "I wonder if anyone else listens to the birds as long as I do." And sometimes the messages were simply empty, blank, because sometimes longing had no words at all. Theo never expected a reply. He didn't really expect anything. The act of folding, of writing, of releasing, that was enough. It was a ritual, a way to place his softness gently into the wind without expecting the world to catch it. The villagers nearby often smiled when they saw him with paper in hand. "That bird man again," they'd murmur kindly, sending his dreams to the sky. They didn't tease, not really. They simply didn't understand. And Theo didn't mind. He had his birds and his quiet and his gentle lake that felt a little like hope and a little like sleep. Each evening, he would sit at his window, teacup cradled in both hands, a wool shawl across his shoulders, and watch the horizon for returning wings. But the paper birds never came back. They weren't meant to, and still he waited. Every night, as the sky melted into lavender and stars rose like scattered thoughts, a silence inside him, soft and steady, the kind of silence that might one day be filled by something, or someone. He didn't know what he was waiting for, only that it was waiting too, out there somewhere, in the dust of wings. And then, one morning, something changed, a breeze with a different kind of hush. The flutter of something real will follow that breeze. In the next part of our story, the morning began like any other. A stillness hung in the air, soft as fleece, and Theo moved through it in the familiar rhythm of his days. Brushing the sleep from his eyes, setting water to boil, warming his hands against the chipped porcelain mug he always used, the kind with a hairline crack he refused to replace. Outside, mist coiled gently through the tall grass. The trees around the clearing stretched their arms skyward, shaking off the dew in slow, sighing movements. The birds, the real ones, had not yet begun their chatter. It was the hush before song, the pause before waking, and in that tender quiet, Theo folded his morning bird. The parchment was ivory this time, with a faint blue thread running through its fibers. His fingers moved without thought, tucking each crease like muscle memory, shaping the wings, the slender tail, the soft curve of a beak. Then, just before the final fold, he paused and wrote, "If anyone ever reads this, know that I thought of you gently, even if I never knew your name." He smiled just a little and sealed the bird with a final press of his thumb. Then, stepping barefoot into the cold of the porch wood, he lifted his hand and released it. The paper bird caught the air, just as it always did, and Theo watched it spiral upward, its wings stuttering in the early wind. It climbed, drifted, sailed into the gray-blue sky like a thought uncaged. And then he waited. As he always did. He watched it fade, a flicker of pale movement against the low clouds until it disappeared entirely. Theo turned back toward the door, his slippers quiet against the wood. Another morning begun, another bird released, but just before he reached for the latch, he heard something, a sound, soft, winged, real. He turned slowly, unsure if he imagined it, but no, there, perched lightly on the windowsill just beside his weathered chair, was a bird, not of paper, not of folded dreams, a reeled of pale, with a slight curve to its wing and a silver glint in its eye, like starlight caught on snow, and in its beak a tiny roll of parchment. Theo's breath caught, but not with shock, only with wonder, with the kind of that arrives slowly, like dawn on a winter field. He moved carefully, not wanting to startle the creature. The dove tilted its head, waited. As if it had been here before. As if it had always been coming. Theo reached out with careful fingers, whispering something under his breath, maybe a greeting, maybe a thank you, and gently took the scroll from its beak. The dove didn't fly away. It simply stayed there, feathers puffed against the cold, watching him with steady softness. Theo unrolled the tiny parchment and read, "I think I've been dreaming of you for some time." That was all. No name, no signature, just a single sentence. But it reached inside him like a warm hand through chilled linen, like something remembered before it was ever truly known. He looked back at the dove. Its wings twitched slightly. Then it turned and flew, not up but out toward the trees. Theo stood still for a long moment, the note pressed between his fingers, the air holding its breath around him. Then he stepped down from the porch and followed. No coat, no satchel, no preparation, only the note, still warm from the dove's beak. And a feeling in his chest like a bell rung very softly, a chime felt more than heard. The dove moved slowly, fluttering from branch to branch, pausing as if to wait. It didn't soar ahead. It led gently, the way a dream unfolds, coaxing, not commanding, and Theo followed. Through soft hills dusted with gold leaf leaves, beneath arching branches that filtered light like a cathedral, past little stones with moss curled into the shape of old words. The path wasn't marked, but it felt known, familiar, like maybe he'd walked it once, in sleep, or maybe in someone else's story. And all the while, the note in his hand whispered, "It's simple truth. I think I've been dreaming of you for some time, by the time the trees began to open into a clearing. The dove had landed once more, and there, by a stone table stained with ink and scattered feathers, a woman sat, her hands dusted with parchment dust, and something in Theo's chest went very, very quiet. The clearing was hushed not with silence, but with stillness, the kind of quiet that holds something gentle inside it, like the space between heartbeats, like the moment just before snowfall begins. Theo stood at the edge of the trees, his breath barely rising, as if to move too suddenly might startle the very air. She was there, the woman, not imagined, not folded into a dream, but real. Sitting on a smooth stone bench, curved by time and softened by ivy, her hands dusted with the pale smudges of paper and ink. Beside her sat a shallow wooden tray, holding scraps of parchment, ink pots with cracked lids, tiny quills, a small jar of pressed petals, and next to all of it, another dove. Its feathers caught the light, dappled in soft grays and creams, and it blinked slowly as Theo stepped forward. The woman lifted her head, and her eyes met his, not with surprise, not even with curiosity, but with recognition, a slow, quiet kind, like finding a pressed flower between pages you'd forgotten you ever read. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft, low like dusk. I wondered when you'd follow one of them. Theo stopped a few steps away, uncertain whether to speak, whether to sit, whether to breathe. The woman smiled gently and brushed a curl behind her ear. Her fingertips, Theo noticed, were faintly stained violet, likely from ink, maybe from crushed lilac petals. She looked at him again, not blinking. They always came folded, she said. Birds with careful wings, each one a little different. I never knew where they came from, but I kept them. Her hand moved to a small bundle beside her, a satchel, tied with silk cord. She opened it slowly and revealed dozens of paper birds, some smooth, some weather-worn, each one lovingly preserved. I didn't know how to answer, she continued softly, not until the dreams started. Theo stepped closer. What dreams? He asked, and his voice, too, had quieted, as if shaped by the hush around them. The woman tilted her head slightly, the wind catching the edge of her shawl. In them, she said, I was folding birds. But not from my own thoughts. I was folding yours, words I hadn't written, but had felt, and always. Always you were there, not clearly, just. The idea of you, her gaze met his again, until one morning, I scented of Theo's. Fingers instinctively touched the small scroll still tucked in his coat pocket. The dove that had led him here preened its feathers nearby, unconcerned, as if its task had already been completed. I didn't think anyone would answer, she said, more to the trees than to him. But I had to try. There was a long pause, not empty, but full of breath, of leaves rustling softly above them, of paper birds and unspoken words hovering between two people who suddenly didn't feel like strangers. Theo sat beside her, not too close, just near enough to feel the warmth of her presence, to hear her breathing, to see the little lines inked faintly on her fingers where poems must have once lived. He looked at the satchel of folded birds again. Do you ever open them? He asked. She shook her head. No, I don't have to. I already heard them. And then a silence fell between them, not awkward, not uncertain, just quiet, like the pause after a deep sigh, like two branches gently leaning toward one another in the same wind. Theo didn't reach for her hand, and she didn't speak again. Instead, they sat together while the doves wandered gently across the clearing, pecking at soft moss and fluttering their wings like punctuation marks to a sentence that never needed finishing. And slowly, the air around them grew warmer, like something forgotten was being remembered, like something unnamed was beginning to bloom. Later, when the shadows had grown long and golden, and the breeze carried the scent of worn parchment and honeysuckle, she turned to him once more. "What shall we write next?" she asked. They didn't return to the cottage that evening. Instead, Theo and the woman whose name he would later learn was Elia remained in the clearing, beneath a sky turning the color of soft blush and honeyed lavender. The doves settled into low branches, cooing gently as the light changed. Elia had begun folding again. Only now she offered a second piece of parchment to Theo. He took it without a word, and together they folded, not quickly, not with precision, but with a kind of quiet reverence, the way one might handle an old letter or a secret never spoken aloud. Their fingers moved in near unison, each crease familiar yet different. Her hands were steadier, his a little softer, and their birds once folded looked nearly the same, but not quite. Each bore the subtle mark of the one who'd made it. Elia placed her bird gently on her palm, watching the breeze lift a strand of her hair. She smiled without looking at him. "Mine used to fly into my dreams," she said quietly. "Not every night, just often enough." Theo's gaze lingered on her profile, traced by the fading light. "Mine never came back," he murmured. "I didn't think they needed to." Elia looked at him then, slowly. Her eyes were the kind that seemed to remember things before they were said aloud. "I think they didn't need to," she whispered, "because they always knew where they were going." She reached for her satchel again and pulled free a little bundle tied with a worn ribbon, sun-faded and soft. Inside were notes, responses. "I began writing back after the dream started," she said. "I didn't fold mine. I just gave them to the birds, hoping the wind knew where to carry them." She handed him one, not with ceremony, just the way one offers a hand in passing, as if it's the simplest thing. Theo unrolled it. Inside was a message written in warm, looping script. "Some part of me already knows you. I just don't know where from." He swallowed, but gently, as if to keep the quiet in his chest from rippling too loudly. "I've felt that too," he said, "as though I've been walking towards someone for a very long time, but never expected them to turn around." Elia didn't respond. Instead, she laid her hand on the stone bench between them, palm down, relaxed, and turned her gaze toward the sky. It was enough. They sat like that, not touching, but near enough that the space between them felt filled with something warm and invisible, like mist or memory, or the beginning of something. The doves shifted again, feathers rustling like paper. Theo broke the quiet, not with words, but with action. He lifted one of the folded birds, hers, not his, and held it toward the air. It trembled in his hand for a moment, wings catching the light, and then lifted, turning once before drifting into the dusk. Elia followed its path with her eyes. "Do you think they know where to go?" she asked, voice low. Theo looked at her. Steady and sure. "I think they always did." Their eyes met again, but this time it didn't feel like a meeting. It felt like something gently settling into place. The breeze picked up, soft and slow, stirring the leaves overhead, and in that moment Theo reached toward her hand, still resting on the stone, and laid his own beside it, not quite touching, just near, fingertips tracing the edge of hers. Elia didn't look down. She didn't have to. She simply turned her hand over, palm up, and let her fingers brush softly into his. The sun was nearly gone now, but they remained their dot in the hush, between twilight and stars. In the space where doves sleep, and messages drift into dreams, in the beginning of something tender and quiet and true. And in the days that followed, they began to write together, even if the birds carried their words only to the wind, or back into each other's hearts. The days that followed unfolded like petals, slow, quiet, and full of a softness neither Theo nor Elia had known they'd been missing. They didn't speak of love, not with words. They didn't name what was happening. They simply began each morning. Theo would bring 2 mugs of tea, one sweetened with a touch of violet syrup he'd once made from the spring blooms, the other steeped with chamomile and lemon balm. Elia always chose the former. She said it tasted like a memory. And then they would sit, not always at the bench, sometimes beneath the slopped branches of a quiet ash tree or on a blanket near the edge of the clearing, and begin folding. Sometimes they wrote notes for the birds to carry. Sometimes they wrote them only for each other and tucked them into their pockets. Other times they didn't write at all. They just folded, letting their hands move, their thoughts wander, their silences speak. Once Theo looked down at the bird he'd just made and found Elia's handwriting already there, one simple line, inked faintly along the underside of the wing. When I'm beside you, even the sky feels closer. He didn't ask when she'd written it. He didn't need to. That afternoon, they followed the doves to the edge of the hills, where the wind dipped low over the fields and the air smelled faintly of wild thyme and old stone. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Elia walked, with her hands tucked behind her back, and Theo walked just beside her, not touching, but present, anchored, like 2 notes of the same song, played softly and in time. At a T1 point, Elia stopped and turned slightly toward him. The breeze caught her shawl again, pulling it across her shoulder. Theo reached up and gently adjusted it, not quickly, not nervously, just gently, a careful tuck, a soft graze of knuckles against her collarbone, the kind of touch that says everything. Without a single sound, Elia looked up at him, and for a moment the world held its breath. No kiss. No dramatic moment, just a long look, warm and weightless, the kind that stays with you long after it ends. Later, back in the clearing, Theo unrolled one of the notes she'd left by the dove's perch. It read, "Some people find each other through maps or stars or chance. I found you in folded wings. That evening they lit a lantern and set it between them. Its glow cast gold across the stone table, and the shadows danced like soft birds on the grass. They folded more, they whispered less, but their silences had grown fuller. There was a comfort between them now, deep and still, the kind that didn't need tending or explanation. It simply was, like the light through leaves, like dusk settling in. The doves seemed to notice it too. They flew shorter distances now, circling overhead before returning to perch nearby, as though the messages were no longer meant for distant places but for here. For now, sometimes Theo caught Elia watching him, not with longing, not with curiosity, but with quiet contentment. And when she looked away, it was never hurried, only soft, only slow. As if she already knew he'd still be there, and he always was. One evening, just before the stars came out, Elia held out a folded note, not for a bird, but for him. "Read it later," she said, her voice nearly a whisper. Theo tucked it into his pocket without question, and that night, before sleep pulled him gently into stillness, he opened it under the candle's flicker. Inside it said, "You feel like the part of me I forgot I was allowed to keep." It happened one evening as softly as everything else between them had. The sky was vast and lavender washed, the kind of twilight that hums with silence. The breeze had grown warmer, though it carried the scent of dusk earth, paper, feather, and something almost like memory. Theo sat with Elia beneath the tall ash tree, their hands close but not touching. They were folding together again, but this time without purpose. Not for the birds, not for messages, not even for each other, just for the quiet, just for the rhythm. Their fingers moved slowly, each crease deliberate, each fold a pause, a breath. A way to settle further into the hush that wrapped around them like an old quilt. The doves were restless that evening. They flitted between branches, wings whispering in the air. One by one, they began to lift, not in panic, not in flight, but in rhythm, as if something called them. Elia looked up, her head tilted, her eyes wide with something like wonder. "They're gathering," she murmured, and they were more than either of them had seen before, dozens, perhaps more. Lifting into the air in gentle spirals, their wings catching the last of the golden light. They rose above the clearing, above the fields, trailing something behind them. A fine shimmer, like dust or gold or dream ash. Theo watched in stillness. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Elia turned toward him, the sky glowing behind her, and smiled that same quiet, knowing smile that had greeted him the day they met. "Do you think they're carrying anything?" she asked softly. He looked up again. Some of the birds still held tiny slips of paper, some blank, some scrawled with inked lines too small to read. "I think they're carrying everything," Theo said, "even what we never wrote." A pause, deep and velvet, and then Elia leaned her head against his shoulder. And no urgency, no hesitation, just a slow, weightless gesture. Like a leaf settling on to still water, Theo turned slightly to rest his cheek against her hair. It smelled faintly of lavender and ink. The doves circled once more, then began to disappear into the darkening sky, each one trailing soft dust. "Like stars slowly forgetting where they began," Elia whispered. "Do you think they'll come back?" Theo didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled free the very first note he'd ever sent, the one he'd found. Still tucked into the folds of the paper bird, creased button weathered. "If anyone ever reads this, know that I thought of you gently, even if I never knew your name." He passed it to her, and she held it delicately, as though it might vanish if she blinked. Then she took his hand, fully this time, their fingers wove together, slowly and without ceremony, like roots growing toward one another in the dark. And Theo finally answered, voice low and sure, "They never left." The lantern beside them flickered in the growing dark. The birds were gone now, but their presence lingered in the still air, a hush full of meaning, of messages both sent and unsent. Overhead, the first stars bloomed into view, quiet and sure. Elia laid her folded bird on the stone beside her and smiled without looking at him. "I think we're finished writing," she said softly. Theo nodded. "We've become the story now." And in that moment, it didn't matter if the birds returned. It didn't matter where the notes ended up. They had found each other not through chance or maps or searching, but through softness, through silence, through the dust of wings. And so the night settled around them, full and still. The lantern glowed gently beside their joined hands, casting soft amber across the stone. The birds were gone, but their messages remained, not on paper, not in ink, but in the air, in the hush, in the two hearts folded quietly beside one another. And far above, the sky continued to breathe. Sleep now. Dear listener, let your own thoughts drift like paper birds into the wind. Let the quiet of Theo and Elia's story carry you softly toward dreams where wings rise slowly, dust glitters gold, and love arrives without needing to be called. You are safe, you are warm, and somewhere love is being written still in the dust of wings.